I have a quote from your book, and it's the book, How Do You Know? The one about Wall Street. You wrote, "You don't know, not for sure, and you can't know, not nearly as much as you think you can. But to have an idea about the boundaries is the beginning of wisdom." And I thought it's such a powerful quote. Can you tell me more about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think general semantics, one of the things that made me really appreciate it. It makes me appreciate how the world's always changing. There's always change.
Mm-hmm.
No two things are exactly alike. And we can never know everything about anything. So these kind of three things sort of fold in together. And I think it's not particularly original, I think, to say that knowing the boundaries of what you know, your ignorance is the beginning of wisdom. But I think it's a really profound thing to understand, and to really know, to be humble about what you know, what you think you know, to be open to new ideas, think ideas that run counter to ideas you held. I mean, these are things about thinking, and thinking is, it's not easy really to think. It's hard, sometimes painful, because you have to give up on ideas that you cherished. So, that kind of gets at what I'm, talking about there, that quote.
I like that. And I think in life and in investing, it's very helpful to see that kind of humility, be humble about it, that we can't know everything. And I'll ask you more about it, but let's go back to the time binders. And obviously, you and I briefly talked about it, how everybody is a time binder, all the way from our grandparents telling us stories to ancient philosophers that we can read and find out what they thought at the time. And in your books, you mention some working devices that can help us do a better job, both receiving information, knowledge, and then passing it on. Can you talk about those? They're very useful tools. And the minute you actually see them, you can't look at the ideas in the same way anymore. At least I can't after reading your books.
So you mean Korzybski's ideas like the date and the index and those sorts of things?
Yes.
Yeah, so Korzybski, he was very practical. This comes from his engineering background, I guess. And so it was not just for him, it wasn't enough just to point out these things that we're talking about. He wanted to have a system. He wanted to build some practical set of tools that people could use every day. And so, one of them is he came up with the idea of just using a date. Mm-hmm. So it's like a subscript. So you would say, Warren Buffett, little subscript 1955 is not Warren Buffett subscript 2023. And they're different. Warren Buffett now has a lot of different experiences. He thinks somewhat differently. He's not the same person. So it's there to prevent you from making that mistake of just because something has the same name that it's always the same. And it happens with investing too. I mean, you look at a certain business 5 years ago and you have this idea of it in your head, and that business 5 years ago is not the same business today. You can come at it with fresh eyes. You can even date your own opinions. You can say, what I think about Berkshire or whatever is the last time you looked at it, So this is a way to keep straight that in your mind that things are always changing. People always change, things change. Mm-hmm. So that's one very powerful tool. Seems very simple, the date, but once you start using it, you'll see it. It also has profound effects, like I say, when you date your own opinions, because then you don't feel so attached to them. Right. You can feel free to change your opinion. You can say, yeah, that's what I thought in 2022. I don't think that today, and no problem changing your mind. It detaches yourself a little bit from those ideas. So that's one of them. And the other one he used was in the index. So this would be, he took it from mathematics. So you might say like Republicans with a little subscript X, meaning that you sometimes say, okay, well, Republicans think X. Well, do all Republicans think that? No, not usually. And they're not always equal. Republican subscript 1 is not the same as Republican subscript 2. They're different. They can be very different. Mm-hmm. And different investors, we go under the cover. People will use a label like value investors, but value investor 1 is not equal to value investor 2. They're very, very different kinds and styles, even though we have that one word. So that was another one of his powerful devices that he talked about. Dates, indexes. Those are two big ones. And the last one I really like also is, it's a set, just using et cetera. Mm-hmm. So like any kind of description that you put together, you can remind yourself that you don't know everything by just adding an et cetera at the end of it. Again, it seems really simple, mm-hmm. but when you start using these things and using them in combination, it definitely changes the way you think. It really will. You'd be surprised.
I like the last one because it makes you realize that there might be more items, data points that you have not considered. And you don't have to know at the moment what they are, but just to be aware that maybe you missed something. And I think it's a nice exercise to have.
And that's it. And what you missed might be important, might not be important, but at least you have the idea that you don't have it all.
Let's talk about zesty ginger turmeric sweet potatoes. You mentioned them in your book, and I had to highlight that. And you talk about the power of labels. And I have a quote from your book. You say, investing blindly or by labels only is the way investing is going today. More and more money flowing into more and more ETFs. It's industrial investing, like industrial farming. It doesn't have to taste like a real tomato. It just has to look like one so they can sell it to you. I mean, Chris, wow.
Thank you.
That's a good one.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's true. I mean, the zesty turmeric, what were they again? Carrots.
It was carrots or potatoes.
Yeah,
it was, I think it was
carrots or potato. One of the other, doesn't really matter. But the idea came from an experiment. There was involved a lot of people in a cafeteria, studied over a period of time where they experiment how they label the foods. And they, just put out simple and you call them carrots. And then they would play around with the label and, be like, lemon citrusy carrots. And then they'd have, cholesterol-free carrots or whatever. It didn't have to, necessarily make sense. And then they had them very descriptive one. And you could see that the way they label them would definitely have significant statistical significance in how people would choose it. And so the really, the enriched restaurant style description, it was like a 40% increase. People would go for the carrot over just calling them carrots. Huh? And in fact, when you labeled them in a health conscious way, it actually hurt. And it could have suppressed it, so people almost didn't want it. Even though it was the same thing in all cases, they didn't change the actual carrots at all, just the label. So I was fascinated by that. And I think, a lot of life is like that. And you mentioned investing. I mean, it's the same thing. People, I feel sometimes like it's very difficult to just be a regular retail investor because I don't know how they would necessarily know. They're more easily fooled. If someone tells them this ETF is a home building sector, bet on home building, they don't think to really look in it, really, well, what is it really in there? A lot of the investing on that level is just with labels. So that's why all these big investment houses create endless funds that with labels that are, whatever the hottest thing is.
In your book, you say you like to ask the question, is that a fact? And you write how what most of other facts are just, how do you pronounce the word? Is it inferences? Inferences? Inferences. What's the difference between the two and how that can help us navigate the world? I thought it was really eye-opening. It made me pause because some things that I used to think are facts, I know now they're not at all.
Yeah, right. So general semantics, most of the practitioners will try to get you to raise the bar, raise the threshold for what you consider a fact. And I always think of the famous talk by Irving Lee he gave once. And I write about this in the book where he holds up an apple and he says, are there seeds in this apple? Is that a fact? Is that something or is it, and he makes a point, you don't really know until you cut open the apple and see. You assume it's a fact because all the other apples you've seen have had seeds in them, but you can't say this one specifically.
Right.
So he goes through these little exercises like that, and he does it in a very, better way than I just did it. It's more of a little bit of more shocking and makes you think more. But
I think you mentioned that he says, would you die for it? Like, would
you
bet your, right? Would you bet your life on it?
That's right. That's right. Mm-hmm. He raises the bar. He says, well, would you be willing to, bet your life on it? And then people obviously, well, wait a minute, would I?
I'm not that sure.
Not that sure. So he kind of breaks it down and thinks, well, a fact is something that you can observe and you can physically verify, and inferences are other things.
Speaking of facts and inferences, you quote Martin Sosnoff. And I heard his name. I've never read his books, and I will read his books after reading yours. And the quote is, a running theme is a futility of relying too heavily on facts and figures. His first law is the price of a stock varies inversely with the thickness of the research file. And you add, really good ideas are often strong enough to overpower the finer details.
A couple big lessons I took out of Sosnoff. One was he really drove home the idea of power of having an insider ownership. Mm-hmm. And then one of my favorite lines of his is, entrepreneurial instinct equates with equity ownership, which I always loved. And then this one, which is the the point you're making, which is he's very much pushes back against the tyranny of numbers and thinking that you know something because you can put a number to it, or that you can put a lot of research behind it. So he often talks about how his best ideas were something where he had the least bit amount of evidence that he could really point to, but they were really stark.
It's the argument that in investing, the best ideas, when you look back, they were really obvious.
Almost obvious, yeah.
Right?
Really
They're staring.
Scream out at you. And the ones that you got to sweat over and you're torturing yourself with models and getting all this extra detail to try to justify it, right? Those are the ones that do the worst. That's the idea of the returns go very inversely with the thickness of the research. More work you got to do, Sometimes I do think about that. I'm like, well, this could be a compelling idea, but, it's a lot of work and it's probably not worth it. It's, more information doesn't necessarily lead to a better decision, can actually lead to a worse outcome. And there's a variety of experiments on that too, where you take experts choosing whatever it is and you give them 4 factors, then you give them 16, you can actually see a marked decline in
Exactly.
So it's one of the things I think about a lot when I'm investing in the companies. I try to really kind of get it, the essence of it, for lack of a better word. It sounds mystical, but I don't mean it that way. Just like, what are the really key important pieces of this business? And usually there's just a few things that are absolutely critical. And, if they break down, then you have a problem. And then a lot of the other stuff is just sort of details that get kind of come out over the wash over a very, very long period of time.
There were at least 2 things that shocked me, but in a good way, in your book. And I think that was the purpose of it. One is you say how 1 + 1 doesn't always equal 2. And the second one, you say that history can be rewritten.
So Korzybski was into this, where he would say, you say 1 + 1 is 2. That's like it's some identity we all accept. People say it almost as an argument. 1 + 1 always equals 2. It doesn't always equal 2. 1 + 1 equals 2 it's a symbol system. It's an abstraction. It's set up in a certain way. But in the real world, when you add one thing to another, you don't always get 2. And he has a variety of examples from science and chemistry. One of them I remember is if you add 1 gallon of water and 1 gallon of, I think it's alcohol, you have something less than 2 gallons of liquid because it becomes somewhat denser. And there's other things he adds there. When you add light to light, you don't get twice as much light. The laws of reflections, actually, you can create blindness with that way. So there's lots of these things in the real world. He adds different, there's different atoms you add. The same thing don't work quite the same way. So the real world is not additive. It doesn't have that principle. And in business, we know that too. You put one company together with another company. Sometimes it's not that you just have 2 that were the same before. You can very much have something less or more, depending on how that goes. So, and then history is somewhat similar. You just said it. You said, when you said history, what is history to you? You said it was stories and experiences, and right. So that's what I think it is as well. And those stories can always be retold. Yeah. They always be told in a different way. There is no such thing as history as just one thing that is permanent and stays the same all the time. It's just, again, going back to those models that we talked about. You have to pull out certain things. Well, what do you pull out? And it's up to the historian. They're the one who picks and chooses, and that's why every generation we always have a new biography of Abraham Lincoln will come out, and you're thinking, well, what the heck could possibly anybody say about Abraham Lincoln that hasn't already been said in countless biographies? But there's always a new generation that wants to interpret the story or reinterpret the story in their own way. The same thing with any big historical event. The American Revolution, you could tell the American Revolution through a dozen different lenses, right? So in that sense, history can always be rewritten for the same reason. Any story can always be retold in a different way.
I'm familiar with the concept of delayed gratification, but you share the idea of delayed reaction in your book. And I think that's something that I practice, but after reading your book, I think I'll practice it even more, and not just in investing. But can you talk more about it? What is delayed reaction in life and investing?
Yeah, it's a difficult thing to practice, but if you keep at it, I think you can get better at it. So the idea Korzybski taught was that he was trying to go against this, where certain words would come out, certain phrases or images, and you have an automatic reaction to it. So he was trying to he wanted to teach you to sort of pause a bit, not come up with not react or judge it right away. The idea to leave yourself kind of open time to reflect a little on what.
Somebody came up to you after your talk who was wearing overalls.
Yeah, this is a story I've told several different times because it had a big impact on me. So apologies for, those who have heard it yet again. But, yeah, I remember it very, very well. I was young, investment researcher, analyst, writing my newsletter at the time. And I was at a financial conference and a guy came up to me after one of my talks and he was wearing overalls, not joking, like full farmer overalls. And my immediate reaction to when he came up was, this guy is just a country bumpkin and I don't know how he got in here, but I can't wait to get out of this conversation, kind of thing. But as soon as, I started talking to him, I was completely wrong. I mean, this guy was, a very smart, successful, investor, person. And that in part, that's why he could do that, right? That's why he could walk into a room like that and not have any worries because he was so confident, sure, comfortable with himself. So after that, I vowed I'd never do that again. I would never judge anyone like that again. So that's the story there, and that's the experience.
I think it can help us all in life and in investing just to save the judgment until a moment later, because you might be just wrong in any direction. And I think it's our natural inclination is to judge quickly. I mean, I'm sure you've seen it too, where there's these different studies that come out and say people make up their mind whether or not to continue to read a piece within 7 seconds. So I always think of that when I used to write my newsletter at Agora, we would always focus a lot on headlines and leads because we had this in our mind. You only got seconds. That reader is going to make up their mind whether they should continue to read or not. So you gotta grab them right away what you want. Term English minus absolutes. And I really like this idea because I feel like from the early days of school, like any school, we're taught in absolutes. There's one correct answer. And it goes all the way from the 2+2 all the way to building an elaborate DCF in grad school. And I remember one specific professor, and maybe he's even listening to this, but he thought that there will be just one correct answer or a very small range around a certain amount, price. So we did the study, we did DCF, we built it, we all came up with different numbers, and he says wrong, wrong, wrong. And then one person was almost right. And we said, what does it mean to be right with a DCF? And he said, well, the company sold for this much in real world. But we both know that what things sell for doesn't really mean that it was the actual value. And it could have been worthless the year after. So.
Right. And your inputs could have just accidentally got to that number, right? There's lots of ways to get there.
So I thought
eigenvalue problem. To present value of today's company, you can get there at dozens of ways.
Exactly. So I thought he's teaching an interesting tool that can be used in interesting ways, but I think he got it wrong what it's meant to do. And I had other teachers that introduced me to DCF all over again, but I thought that one specific one again made me think in terms of absolutes. So let's talk about it. English without absolutes and why absolutes can get us in trouble.
Yeah, I like English minus absolutes too, because it's one of the things that's really easy to apply and start using.
Yeah.
There's a long list of words that are absolute. So, always, never. Those are like simple ones, right? Anytime you hear anyone say always or anything, never, those are should be little flags that go up and make you at least question always. I mean, really? Or never? And,
nobody goes there anymore. People say
nobody goes there anymore. Yeah. Nobody, everybody. I have a list of a variety of absolute terms. And, but once you start getting attuned to those and, your little inner general semanticist will start flagging those things and make you pause a little over those.
Think about it a little bit more. Yeah. No value investor would ever buy it.
That's all it's supposed to do. It just makes you pause and think. And maybe that it's harmless and you just move on, but it might be something that's really worth pulling out and saying, well, wait a minute, that's not right.
Yeah. But, in investing in those moments, and we call ourselves contrarians at Seacard, but the idea is that there are times when it pays to disagree with the crowd. And when the crowd says never or ever or forever or always, and you pause and you realize maybe it's a bit different this time, or maybe the situation is unique, it can actually create an opportunity that you might be noticing before anybody else appreciates it. So I think that moment can really make a difference. And
yeah, it's actually one of the, reminds me, you said, it's different this time. It reminds me, that's what everybody likes to say. That's the most dangerous words, but it's not really. I always think that's a very ironic that would be the case because it's always different. Every time is always different from every other time. Never the same. Different people. Well, I said never right then. But the people are different. Different times, different Now, the broad outlines, the broadest, I know the intent of it is the broad outlines of bubbles and busts are similar, but,
I think
those details could be important.
I think this term is used different this time to cover up a bubbly situation in the markets, that somehow, for some reason, we should accept that the prices.
It reminds me of one of the really good formulations in general semantics is it teaches you to see differences where others see similarities, and similarities where others see differences.
There you go. I like that. It's they zig, you zag, and the other way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Chris, I like to close out those discussions with the idea of success. And you and I, in the last recording, talked about your definition of success. But in your book, I found a longer quote that I really liked, and I'll share it and you can add to it. And the quote is, "Now, before I end this book, I must ask at last one big question. What does it matter if you succeed or not as an investor? I ask you to give it some thought. Many foster an illusion of thinking things will be better if they have more money. Things will be different, that much we know. It's one of our basic propositions. But human beings seem hardwired not to be content. Whatever you achieve, you will always want more." And I thought this is really powerful because we want to be better at things. We want to have more money. We want to be better investors. But you asked the deeper question, which we just borrowed from Wendell Johnson. What then?
Yeah. What does it mean? I think the way I think about it too is, do you enjoy your everyday existence when you get up in the morning, and do you have a good day? And you just keep piling up those good days, and then
it's been a good life.
Yeah, it's been a good life. Will it matter that much? Like we were talking about before, whether you have, X or a little less or a lot. I mean, this makes you think about it.